Hello my dear friends, you're on the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 21st of March of 2023. Today we have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. And first we're going to start with the bad piece of information we received today from United Kingdom. According to information, I believe you heard that United Kingdom is going to transfer depleted uranium munition to Ukraine. Mainly they're going to supply Ukraine with 120mm shells. And the Ukrainians are going to use the shells, I believe, in their Leopards and their tanks to attack the Russian tanks. And today, the Minister of Defense of Russian Federation, Shoigu, and the President of Russian Federation, Vladimir Putin, have already gave their own opinion about this situation. We understand that this is another cross of the red line, and I believe that this conflict is going to be escalated more by the parties. Because now the Russians understand that they need to reply, they need to send a message to the Ukrainians and to the Western countries. This depleted uranium shells is very dangerous, and this is not just about the damage that these shells are able to deal to the Russian armored vehicles, trenches, and so on. This is the question about pollution of the ground. This is the question about losses among wounded soldiers after battle, because we understand that this is like uranium munition, right? So we understand that there are going to be illnesses and diseases after usage of these shells. And furthermore, people and civilians on the territory where the Ukrainians are planning to use the shells will be no longer able to use this ground, this territory, to live, to survive, and so on. And we understand that these shells will be sent to Ukraine, or maybe they have been already sent to the Ukrainians, and maybe there are these shells, these types of weapon are already on the territory of Ukraine. If you remember, a few weeks ago there were a lot of cases when the Russians managed to discover and spot radiational signal from Odessa. So maybe these shells are already on the territory of Ukraine. And you need to understand that the Ukrainians are not going and are not planning to use this shell somewhere near Kiev or somewhere near Lvov. They're going to use the shells during a greatest offensive operation of Ukrainians to the south of Melitopol. So the thing is that even if the Ukrainians are going to lose this counter-offensive operation, they're trying to do that nobody will be able to live on this territory. So we can say that it's like they're saying, so if we are not can't get this, nobody is going to take this. So this about this bad piece of information. But before we start discussing the situation on the ground, we have a lot of updates. First, let's make a little joke. Today I made a poll on the YouTube and Telegram channel where I was asking you, if you could choose the leader of North America, who would you choose for this role? And as you can see, there are around 4,500 people joined this poll, and as a result, you see the results that Donald Trump is the leader of North America according to the poll. Of course, I believe that maybe after this video the results will be changed, and I understand after the video, after I created this poll, I understood that that I made a lot of mistakes. First of all, I didn't add an option that maybe people who joined the poll didn't want to vote for anybody or something like this. And as you can see, Joe Biden got just 3%, and the Prime Minister of Canada another 3%, and the President of Mexico got the second position on the North America. I believe that within the next days we will remake the same poll. We will add, I believe, the rest of the presidents of North America, and I believe that this is going to be much more fair in comparison with the current poll. It was just a test, because the thing is that it's a year past since the beginning of the special military operation, and we are not just a military summary channel or something like this. First of all, we are a society. We are a group of people, and we are experts. Me and you together, we try to analyze, try to understand, and believe me, we understand more than the rest of the people. There are not just military summary who provides a very interesting and real information about the situation in Ukraine. There are a lot of mappers, and I believe you know them, and together we now for at least military summer channel, I want to create something like nominations, and I want to make a separate video to nominate some people, their heroes, not just the heroes, anti-heroes, special operation, and I want to do this with your help. So that was the poll where I tried to test these further nominations. They're going to be, let's say, the leader of North America, Europe. Of course, during this nomination, we are going to decide who is going to be the leader, or let's say a man of the planet Earth, like Times do there every year. They're trying to make their own nominations first. Furthermore, we're going to nominate the most important battle. We will nominate soldiers, maybe some brigades, the situation, the events that took place, and we will try to make a small video about all the things that happened during the previous year. Another poll I did yesterday about Bakhmut and Avdiivka, and as you can see, the question was which city will fall first. And when that poll started, very interesting that most of the people who joined this poll thought that Bakhmut would fall first, but later, after a few videos about Avdiivka, a lot of people changed their mind, and now, as you can see, that the people split into camps, and let's say 50%, 46% think that Bakhmut and Avdiivka are going to fall at the same time, and just 8% think that none of these cities will fall at all, and the Ukrainians are able to hold their position and maybe even to start their own counteroffensive operation and to push the Russians back. So very interesting, very interesting. I will try to make more polls, try to understand, analyze your thoughts, and this will help me to improve the things that we're doing together. Now let's return back to the front lines. Let's first start with Avdiivka. As you can see, according to the Russian sources map, this map is updated, completely updated. Now we see that Krasnogorovka, these towns, is under Russian control. The towns like Kamyanka and the Stepove are in the gray zone, because I believe there are still clashes. The Ukrainians still able to send their reserves in this area. I believe that within the next few days this map is going to be updated and these territories will be colored in red. So that means that there's 100% control over this area. And let's return back to the Western sources map. As you can see, they show almost the same picture with one difference about Vysyola, that this town is under Russian control. And Stepove. So the Russians, as soon as they cross the railroad, as soon as they establish control over Stepove, but some sources are saying that there are still heavy clashes inside this town, and we can understand them, because also it's highly unlikely that the Russians were able to establish control without so easy. I believe that they managed to cross, they managed to establish control over the forest line along the railroad. I believe that they managed to develop their movements along the forest lines inside this village, and now this town is more in the gray zone, but let's say assume that the Russians controls, let's say, 70% in comparison with the Ukrainian controls, who controls, let's say, 30%, but you need to understand that is a real speculation from my side. Furthermore, but some Russian sources are saying that from the ground, the soldiers on the ground are saying that as soon as the Russians managed to cross the railroad, they started offensive operation not in direction of Berdichi. Yes, there are heavy clashes in the vicinity of Berdichi, but now the Russians are trying to push in direction of Orlovka. So this is the main Russian goal. This is the main Russian attack. Their distance between these two towns is just 3 kilometers, so believe me, the Russians are able to cross these fields in half an hour. They just need to deploy their forces here. They are doing some kind of pin down operation in direction of Berdichi with one purpose: not to allow the Ukrainians to be flexible and to freeze them, to pin down, not to allow them to attack the Russian tanks, armored vehicles in their flanks while they are moving in direction of Orlovka. And this is very interesting because when talking about Avdiivka itself, I showing you the map about the icons above Avdiivka, about the activity above Avdiivka, and as we saw that this town is under very heavy Russian fire. So that's why I think that, furthermore, as you can see, there is a forest lines that close the observation and view from this industrial zone. So I believe that if the Russians were very smart. If they made a small plan, they could cross the fields and to attack Orlovka by bypassing the forces in Berdichi, Semyonovka, and this industrial zone. I am not sure about the results of that attack, but the Russians are saying that everything is pretty serious and dangerous for the Ukrainian side. And of course, if the Russians are able to penetrate this area, using like a Jagger attack, and to establish control over Orlovka, this is going to be not just like operational, tactical encirclement. This is going to be the end of Avdiivka story. And the best thing that Ukrainians who located in Avdiivka could do is to surrender immediately and to pray that they are not going to be judged for the bad things they did while attacking and shelling Donetsk during the previous days or months. I believe that tomorrow we either are going to receive the reports or not, and something tells me that maybe the Russians will be able to develop something in this area. So now this is exactly what the Russians were doing. Furthermore, the Russians continue doing some kind of support operation from the south, trying to pin down the Ukrainians in Severna and Toninka, with one purpose: not to allow them to be flexible, mobile, and not to allow them to move their forces back to Orlovka. This is a very interesting and very difficult plan, but something tells me that it could work out from the Russian side, and they might achieve significant success by attacking Avdiivka from many directions. The Russians are saying that as a result of clashes during the previous 24 hours on Donetsk front line, the Ukrainians lost 160 soldiers, 7 armored vehicles, and 1 artillery system D-20. And most of the clashes were on Avdiivka area and on Bakhmut area as well. Now let's go to Bakhmut. As you can see, there are also situation map has been updated, the Western sources map. Now this map shows that the Russians almost on the corner, on the edge of the road. The Russians managed to cross the forest line between Khromova and let's say the Yahidne, this area. When talking about the central part, the south part, this map is not updated because we know that the Russians have some progress in Budyonovka, Sabachaevka, in this south area, south block that located on the north of Opotne. Furthermore, the Russians managed to develop their bridgehead on the north near all these industrial zones, trying to increase the bridgehead in this area. The same situation we can say about the south area. The Russians are pushing, trying to encircle. We know that during the week there were heavy clashes in the vicinity of the football field. Furthermore, the Russians are trying to attack in the area, in the south area near the MiG-17 statue, trying to cut this road as well and trying to reduce the Ukrainians' possibilities to supply and support this area. So anyway, as we can see, now this is like the second stage of storming process of Bakhmut. So we can split Bakhmut according to its configuration into 3 parts: the eastern Bakhmut, central Bakhmut, and the western Bakhmut. On all these 3 parts are split by the river Bakhmutka and by the railroad. So, and this is like some kind of like areas and blocks that the Russians are trying to take one by one. As after the eastern part fell, the Russians start storming the central part from the north, from the south, and there were a few pieces of information that the Russians managed to cross the river Bakhmutka near the marketplace, and I believe that now they want to push the Ukrainians from this area to the western part of Bakhmut. And the thing is that the Ukrainians still have a lot of problems of supplying and supporting this town. They can't get enough of ammo, they can't get enough of shells, manpower to be on the safe side and to support normal level of defense, of course. But there are a lot of soldiers inside of Bakhmut. Some sources are saying, as we discussed, that there are somewhere from 10 till 20,000 soldiers, and as you can see, there are every single day there are less and less place for the Ukrainians inside the town. And one thing, if you have, let's say, 20,000 soldiers inside this Bakhmut, and completely different situation when you have, let's say, 15 or 10 or 12,000 soldiers, but just in the eastern part. So by this, the Russians are trying to push the Ukrainians into the western part of Bakhmut, but from the other side, we understand that the Ukrainians, even if they have possibility to make some rotation, they can do this just with the small portions, small groups, maybe 20, 50, 20, 30 soldiers per one per hour, let's say, something like this, or per one race or something like this. And of course they can't move the entire army from Bakhmut at once, because they will be under very heavy fire and they're gonna lose a lot. And from one side, the Russians are trying to reduce the square meters under Ukrainian control and trying to push them with them all in one direction inside of this block that located inside of 2 blocks, to be more precise, that located in the western Bakhmut. This is the first block that Ukrainians are trying to hold, because this residential area with the high buildings, and of course the small block located on the west part of Bakhmut. And this is the key region that, if the Ukrainians are able to keep this block, that means that they are able to save control, at least some control over the roads that they can use for exchanging process between Bakhmut and Chasov Yar. The Russians continue their offensive operation in direction of Bogdanovka. Very short, small attacks just to analyze and try to fill the defense line and try to find the weak position in this area. The same situation with Orekhovo-Vasilyevka, Minkovka and Priluki. Furthermore, the Russians continue their offensive operation in direction of Ivanovska, and as you can see, the Western sources map has been updated one more time. If you remember, during the beginning of this week, according to this map, this western salient was cut, and according to the information, the Russians were forced to step back very far in direction of Klishchevka. But today, the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine gave us their report about the situation on the front lines, and they reported or included the town by the name of Pritsechin in the report, saying that the Russian attack in this direction was repulsed by the Ukrainian forces. So as you can see, as we discussed, the Russians completed their operational pause, and now day by day, step by step, they're going to increase the pressure, and they're going to complete the story with Bakhmut for 100%, because it's time not to allow the Ukrainians to move their reserves from Bakhmut in direction of Avdiivka front blocking process. Furthermore, the weather allows the Russians to attack the Ukrainian tanks, artillery systems, supply roads that located around Bakhmut because of the weather. So the Ukrainians can't stretch their forces, and they need to keep their army very tied to each other, very close one to another. So that's why the Russians can use these benefits, using the light infantry and artillery support, to spot, discover the Ukrainian armored vehicles and to destroy them by heavy fire from their side. Now let's go to the north and let's discuss the Liman front line. As you can see, there are also a lot of icons, and one more time, as you can see, it's maybe the first day since the beginning of this week when we start seeing some icons above Bakhmut that shows that the Russians reactivated their movements and they complete their operational pause. They moved more to artillery systems closer to the front line. They established control over some blocks inside the Bakhmut, and now they're ready to continue and to collapse and to make a final rush and to complete the storming of Bakhmut within the next few weeks, I believe, as we discussed, before the 1st of April. But they still have just 10 days to do this. Now something tells me that maybe they're not going to fit these timings, but anyway, if the Wagnerians are not able to take them by the end of this month, I believe that the first days of April is going to be the last day for a Ukrainian garrison inside the Bakhmut. The only thing that can change the situation is successful counter-offensive operation from the Ukrainian side. But I believe that Wagnerians have already prepared their position during the previous operational pause, and now they're ready to meet the Ukrainian forces. Now let's go to the Liman. As you can see, there are also a lot of icons. The Russians reported that during the previous 24 hours, as a result of counter-artillery duels, they managed to destroy 3 radar systems all over the front lines in Liman, Donetsk, and other front lines of Ukraine. The Russians reported that as a result of clashes on Liman front line, the Ukrainians lost 95 soldiers, 2 armored vehicles, and 2 artillery systems. As you can see, this is not the first day in a row when we see the reduce of losses of Ukrainians on this front line. I believe that the Russians on this front line have completed their mission to support Russians in the vicinity of Bakhmut. Now the Liman front line needed a small operational pause because they were keeping and were supporting this level of activity on this front line for a very long time, since the beginning of January, and there are almost 3 months passed since the Russians started movements on Liman front line. It's normal to have some operational pause. It's normal to bring more forces, to bring some reserves, to get more armored vehicles, shells, and so on. And I believe that maybe within a week they're going to restore the pressure, and we're going to see more updates coming from this area. When talking about Kupiansk front line, the Russians reported that as a result of clashes, the Ukrainians lost 80 soldiers, 3 armored vehicles, and 1 artillery system D-20. As you can see, the level of losses on this front line has been a little bit increased in comparison with the previous days. I believe that the Russians do want to complete the story of this small bank of Oskol River. This is a pain in Russian had this area. There are still Ukrainians, Mosykovka, the vicinity around Liman Первый. They need to get as close as possible to Kupiansk, but they still haven't completed the situation between Dvorichna, Dibrovka, these towns, and Dvorichna from the Russian side. So maybe this situation is connected with this bank of the river. Now let's go to Zaporozhye front line. And according to the Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation, the Ukrainians during the clashes on South Donetsk and Zaporozhye area lost 40 soldiers, 3 armored vehicles, and 3 artillery systems. As you can see, there are not much changes. There are not much. The level of losses is the lowest, I believe, since the beginning of this year. The Ukrainians haven't started any offensive operation. I believe that now they're trying to analyze and think what to do next, or to help forces in Avdiivka, or maybe to continue. From the other side, the Russians understand that when talking about Zaporozhye, everything is ready from the Ukrainian side to start the greatest offensive operation. But as you can see, there are fields and it's like empty land, like no one's land, and there are not much places where the Ukrainians are able to hire 40,000 soldiers army. So that's why the Ukrainians uses Zaporozhye and Dnipro as the main bases where they're trying to hide their forces. And the Russians understand, and they have a very development network of spy network in this area. And during the previous 24 hours, the Russians made another attacks in Zaporozhye, and also the Russians were attacking Dnipro by uranium and missiles. I believe maybe within the next 24 hours we're going to receive more piece of information about the losses and so on. But for now, it's just the fact that we see that the Russians continue attacking these towns where the Ukrainians are trying to keep and save reserves before the greatest counteroffensive operation. When talking about Kherson, there are still artillery duels all over the front line. The Ukrainians lost 40 soldiers, 3 armored vehicles, and 3 artillery systems in this area. They lost 2 Akatsiya howitzers and 1 M777 howitzer. This one, the Russians put an icon showing the real area. Right before we start creating this video, we receive a piece of information from the Russian sources and from the Ukrainians that the Russians started attacking massively with drones and missiles the Odessa airport. This is exactly the area that Ukrainians were using to send drones in direction of Crimea. If you remember, now yesterday, I believe it was yesterday, it was yesterday when there was a massive drone attack in direction of Jankoy, the town in Crimea. As you can see, there is an air base, military air base. There are a lot of warehouses, there are a lot of forces and so on. So the Ukrainians were trying to attack this area. And as you can see, all these things are tightly connected. I'm talking the counter-offensive operation in Zaporozhye, attacks in direction of Jankoy, and the Ukrainians are trying to test upcoming offensive operation. Of course, they understand if they want to start operation here, they need to destroy the Russian ammo depots and the reserves in Crimea. So that was some kind of test attack. Now, the drones attack was repulsed according to the Russian sources. The Ukrainians are saying that they managed to achieve success by destroying some warehouses or something like this. And today, as the Russians are calling this, they got the act of revenge from the Russian side. There are all these missile strikes the Russian calls like act of revenge. I believe that we are going to receive more updates tomorrow about the losses of the Ukrainians, about armored vehicles and tanks and maybe air system and or manpower. But for now, we have just a video confirmation and some picture from Odessa about the past strikes. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds to condemn any violence in Ukraine. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.